Beloved, I invite you to stand for the reading of the word this morning, those who are able and capable and willing, as we kick off a new series entitled Hanging Loose in an Uptight World. I want us to ponder what the choir just sang from the Hebrew hymn book, Psalm 133 in its entirety, which reads thusly: How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down upon the beard, on the beard of Aaron, running down over the collars of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord ordained his blessing, life forevermore. Thus ends the reading of the word. Amen. You may be seated. I want to put a tag on this text, talk just for a few fleeting moments from the subject, the goodness and pleasantry of unity. The goodness and pleasantry of unity. I wonder if you can resonate with an experience that I had a few days ago. On my way to a funeral, I was not the eulogist, but called upon to serve in the celebration of life at another congregation. I stopped by the bank to take care of what I thought would be a few moments to deal with a certain financial transaction. As I entered the bank, the line was longer than I had expected, and there was one teller behind the counter taking care of a lengthy line of people who had financial business. There was one lady in the line who registered rather vocally and vehemently her displeasure with the situation. Her patience had grown thin, and her tolerance level had come next to nil. And the longer she waited, the more vociferous and vocal she registered her displeasure. Have you seen that? Have you experienced that? That some folks just have no patience at all. But it dawned on me in that moment that we are in a time of tension in which our relationships are strained. Every level of relationship, every kind of relationship seems to be at a breaking point. Our relationship with institutions are strained in that there is very little trust in the institutions that have been time-honored and carried out social and civic functions. Because we now see that institutions are governed by greed and they're charging more for common goods just because they can. Our relationships with other people, our interpersonal relationships are strained to the level of breaking as we see an escalation of violence against women and children and the very human life itself, as the homicide rate across the nation continues to rise and rise on a daily basis. And after this week, with the rendering of the Supreme Court's decision, our relationship with government is strained because government seems to have broken another promise to people who have been slighted by historic wrongs. The application of the law to some with no regard to historic wrongs seems to be a slight to the democratic process. And when they struck down affirmative action in college applications, they said essentially we value only one kind of intelligence, and we do not appreciate diversity. Because, beloved, we all know that there are different kinds of intelligence. What good does it matter if you know how to find the hypotenuse of a triangle but don't know how to make a mayonnaise sandwich when there's nothing to eat? We know that there are different ways and different kinds of intelligence. Anybody here ever had to make a mustard sandwich, a tomato sandwich, an onion sandwich? And sometimes when things get so bad, you just make a wish sandwich. You wish you had something to put between the bread, but it takes intelligence to do that, which adds to the diversity of the learning environment. How can one have a discursive environment of intelligence and education when the experience is limited to one kind of expression of intelligence? And even having said that, beloved, it means now that we are on a new trajectory in our nation. And we are going to have to find our future in our past, because we are going to have to turn off the television, which we used to call the idiot box, and put down the smartphones, which all make us dumb, and pick up some books and learn some critical thinking and insist upon our children excellence and hard work, which we know will eventually pay off. Yes, beloved, and even in church, our relationships are strained as we see a historic pattern of clergy abuse against children and others. There is an overarching, pervasive tension all around, and people are simply on edge. Reminds me of that old song, rap song from the 70s, "Don't push me, 'cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. Sometimes it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. Don't push me because I'm on edge. Don't touch me, don't talk to me, don't relate to me." People are simply edgy and living intensive relationships. But beloved, I'm here to tell you that the Bible gives us an alternative view for how people ought to live one with another. Here in the 133rd Psalm, these old words of wisdom continue to ring true. How good and pleasant it is when kindred or brothers live together in unity. How good, how pleasant, how refreshing, how joyful, how beneficial it is when folks know how to get along with one another. Here the writer lifts up for us a world that may be unfamiliar to most, but serves as a remote memory to some. Because we understand in the ancient Near Eastern world, brothers were forced to live together, even though there was a hierarchy and pecking order of their birth. The oldest son would get 2/3 of the father's inheritance, while the others received 1/3, which had to be distributed equally among the number of brothers. But when brothers could come together and keep their ancestral land together, the writer makes the claim how very good and how very pleasant it is for brothers to live together in unity. Some of us may remember that because we come from some of the remote parts of the South where uncles and brothers and grandpas work together and live together and work together on the family farms. This is not something that is alien. It's just remote, because we understand that when brothers cannot get along together, disastrous consequences take place. Cain and Abel couldn't get along, and you know what happened there, the first murder. Joseph and the sons and the other sons of Jacob couldn't get along, but you know what happened there? A brother was sold into slavery. Jacob and Esau, who were twins, battled for the birthright, and we know what happened there. There was a strained relationship that separated them for years. When brothers cannot get along together, there are disastrous consequences. But the writer reminds them how good and how pleasant it is when brothers can dwell together in unity. In fact, King James made so impressive this remark that it included the word behold. Behold how good and pleasant it is. In other words, beloved, pay attention. Behold, look at what's taking place here. Don't miss the mark. Don't neglect what you see. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers, when kindred dwell together in unity. This, beloved, is, I submit to you, both an affirmational and aspirational tenet of truth. When brothers can get together, when people can come and live in harmony, it is pleasant, it's beautiful, it blesses the spirit, and it is something that all of us must live into because we recognize the tensive strands in human relationships. And all of us deal with those tensions between husbands and wives, parents and children, employers and employees, community and versus community. But the text gives us an ideal for which we ought to aspire. Live together in unity. Now, I need to say something about this thing of unity because usually in our Western cultural context, unity equates to uniformity, where we expect everybody to look the same, to walk the same, to talk the same, and to behave identically. But, beloved, unity is not uniformity. Unity is when I can appreciate who God made you to be without taking anything from who God made me to be. And when you can learn to live where I can recognize and affirm and celebrate who God made you to be without tearing you down in order for me to be built up, then you're on your way to living in unity. And within the context of unity, there is great diversity. My great aunt always used to say, son, it takes all kinds to make a world. Everybody's not going to be alike. Not everybody's going to talk alike. Not everybody's going to have the same life and cultural experiences. Not everybody is going to have the same orientations. But regardless of how you think about folks, you got to recognize that there is a person of worth and dignity because they are made in the image and likeness of God. I don't have to agree with you, but you're still my brother. I may not have the same political values, but you're still my sisters. We may not love one another the same way, but you're still a human being made in the image and likeness of God. Unity means that we have to start appreciating and celebrating and affirming who the other is. And when we can do that, we will discover that what I'm missing, you bring something to the table. You augment my minuses with your pluses. You bring a set of values and perspectives that I may not have considered, which will eventually enrich my life in the dynamic interchange of interpersonal relationships. How good and how pleasant it is for brothers, for kindred to dwell together in unity. But most of us have what I call the Austin Powers syndrome. You remember the Mike Myers movie from years ago where Dr. Evil was the nemesis of the heroes and the heroines in the movie series. And Dr. Evil had a little person that he carried on his chest called Mini-Me. Y'all remember that? You can laugh. It's all right. I laugh too. Mini-me. And most of the time, what we want in relationships and in communities and in the context of broader spectrums of human engagement is we want many me's. I want you to think like me. I want you to dress like me. I want you to experience life like me without any regard of your own value, worth, and experience. And so we cannot live in unity when there is an effort at uniformity. But the text tells us that if we can get beyond the desire and the need for uniformity to actually live in unity, then that experience becomes dynamic, and it is like the oil that runs from Aaron's head down to his beard and over his collars all the way down to his feet. You see, what the writer was doing was borrowing an ancient metaphor of cosmetology. The oil was used as a way of beautification. It was poured over the head to make the hair a dressing and to make the person smell good, as it was a scented oil. And what the text wants to paint as a picture is, if we can pour out the oil of understanding and community, then it blesses us and it runs down and blesses all of life. It is like the oil that got all over Aaron the high priest as he was appointed to fulfill his duties, and it blessed everyone around him. But so many of us are governed not by the scented oil of beauty and holiness, but by the stench of sameness. And therefore we live impoverished lives. Second thing the writer says here, that it is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the plains of Zion. Now, if one doesn't know the topography very well, one would think that this is just a simple metaphor, but there's something that is being stated here beyond the obvious. Hermon was a place 200 miles to the north of Jerusalem. It was a place high in the altitude, and it was often damp and moist and fertile and vibrant and verdant. Whereas Jerusalem was arid and dry and desiccated and deserted. And yet, the writer says that that which is 200 miles to the north has to bless that which is 200 miles to the south. You missed it. What the dews of Hermon suggest is that for those of us who have abundance, we must learn to take responsibility and be a blessing for those who live in arid places. Unity takes place when I recognize that we are brothers, and if I got something, then you need to have the same thing that I got. If I'm lacking something, then we'll all go without until the Lord decides to bless us. If I'm bountifully and overflowingly blessed, then I gotta share that with those of you who have your hands out and empty cups needing to be filled. Yes, this unity, this fellowship is like the dew of Hermon with its overflowing resources of water in an arid climate that falls on the mountains of a deserted and dry place. We got to learn, beloved, to share. And it is when we learn to share and not hoard that there is a blessing on all of life. Besides, that old adage and metaphor still holds true, that if you holding on to everything that you got, then God can't get anything else in a closed hand. But when you learn to open your hand, that which is released is now open to receive something new and greater, even from the divine. The dew of Hermon is about sharing and opening our hands so that there is a more equitable distribution of not just resources, but opportunities in the land. And I know with the tension of our relationships in government and church and with other people and with institutions, how do we go about doing this? For this seems to be a task which is beyond our capability. To use the old framework here outlined in the text, where the oldest son is entitled to the majority of the father's estate, it requires that the oldest son forfeits his entitlement and his rights to be inclusive of others. When you can say, this is mine and I'm entitled to it, but I'd rather have my brother than my rights, that's how you do it. When you can say it is of value to have diversity, then you have learned the blessing of the Lord. For where there is unity, the Bible says that the Lord blesses. There where there's unity, not so much the place, but the phenomenon. There, God pours out his blessings upon people where there's unity, where there's fellowship, where there's fraternity and sorority, where there's harmony and collegiality. The text says there, God ordains his blessing of life evermore. And beloved, it is something that while we may forfeit our rights and entitlements to be inclusive, it really is the Lord's doing, because only the Lord can make us one. Only the Lord can bring us together in spite of the tensions and the difficulties of living in community, and only can the Lord unite us where we are fractured and divided. And we see it here in the text. It is the Lord's doing, because everything that's good in the text comes down. You don't see it here, but it's right here. It doesn't come from the bottom up, but it comes down. It's like the precious oil on the head that runs down the beard of Aaron, and it runs down his collars, and it falls down from the mountains from Hermon. Everything that's good always comes down, because the Lord is bringing us together and uniting us and tearing down the middle walls of partition. Everything that happens, it is the Lord's doing, because every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights. So, beloved, every now and then you just need to look up and hold your hands out and say, Lord, let it come down. Let your goodness fall down. Let your mercy fall down. Let your love fall down. Let community fall down. Let the joy of the Lord fall down. It comes down from above. And the all and do in the text are not the only things that have come down. For if I continue reading the story, my Bible tells me that a son came down through 40 and 2 generations. He came down a lineage with prostitutes. He came down from a lineage with liars and beggars. He came down from a lineage of folks that were lofty, but also folks that were lowly. He came down and decided to be among us. He came down to live with you and me. He came down to rescue us. And where would I be if he hadn't come down and died just for me? Where would I be if he hadn't come down? Do I have anybody that's glad today that he came down just to see about you? But I'm glad that he didn't come down 2,000 years ago. But every morning that I wake up, he comes down to see about me. Every morning he visits me by my bedside. Every day he walks with me, talks with me, tells me that I'm his own. Every day he watches over me and guards my heart. Every day he comes down so that I can chill and not be so uptight. Because I know if the Lord be for me, who can be against me? If the Lord be for me and the Supreme Court may be against me, I still win the battle. Because everything good comes down and then spreads itself abroad to bless the entirety of life. There may be somebody here today that has an empty receptacle that needs filling. An empty life of loneliness, an empty life of isolation, an empty vessel of brokenness and suppression. The Lord has come to fill our vessels. I'm reminded of that old hymn that says, like the woman at the well, I came seeking for a blessing, water that could not satisfy. But I found the water of everlasting life. So fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Fill my cup till it overflows. The promise and the blessing for you today is if your vessel is depleted, your patience is exhausted, you're running on fumes and the energy and passion of life has faded, there is one who can fill you to overflowing. If you're here today and you need a filling, you need a blessing that can come only from on high to make new meaning in life, then I encourage you, beloved, to take the initiative to respond to the divine initiative and just simply walk down the aisle and give the Lord your life. If there are those online, someone is waiting for your call, we encourage you to simply dial the number that you see at the bottom of the screen so that your cup might be filled to overflowing. If there's one today, this is your moment. We extend now the invitation to Christian discipleship. Whomsoever will, let him or her come.
Let your glory fill this place. Let your all-consuming fire purify. Fill this temple, purify our hearts. Surround us in this place and breathe a new life within us. send a fresh glory. Purify our